Let's
Welcome,
hear it.
everybody, to Ask a Professor with Noah Feldman. And it's a huge pleasure to introduce to you as my interlocutor and question asker extraordinaire tonight, my wife, Julia Allison, who is an aficionada of all things screen and all media social, and is a fellow at the Shorenstein Center at Harvard University's Kennedy School, where she studies innovation in media with a particular focus on new and independent forms of media, like Substack, a perfect example. So one of us is an expert in what we're about to do, and that would be Julia. As for me, you know me if you signed up. I'm Noah Feldman. I teach constitutional law and other subjects at Harvard University. I've been doing that for around 20 years, and I'm thrilled to join you all. And tonight, our second official Ask a Professor, we decided that it might be more fun for everybody if instead of me peering at a screen and reading questions or trying to read them in high speed as they cross the Substack Live interface, Julia would pose the questions, having curated them from a long list of questions. And I don't know about me, because I'll have to answer questions from a tough questioner. But for the rest of you, I promise you it's going to be a much superior experience to just having me. So welcome, Julia. Thank you for being here. I should add, everybody, that this whole Substack is Julia's brainchild, and she is the manager. And I was about to say éminence grise, but there's no grise in your hair at all. But the present figure for making all this happen. So, Julia, thank you for doing this, and I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Noah. So I thought I was going to do an introduction of you. You don't want me to do that?
Go for it. Introduce me.
So I want to add to that introduction.
It's our
for
first year of
you.
marriage, everybody. So if we're a little too nice to each other, you'll understand why.
No, this is we've been together for 6 years. Like it's not like it's brand new.
Oh, okay,
So
you're boring. Go on.
Noah Feldman was raised in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and he was raised Orthodox Jew. He went to a school called Maimonides, which is one of his favorite subjects. If you ever want to ask him questions about his fascinating upbringing, he has much to say about it. He matriculated to Harvard College, where he graduated first in his class, no big deal. And then he got a Rhodes Scholarship, where he went to Oxford. And then he got a DPhil, which is, like, for everyone who already knows this, I apologize, but it's a PhD in the UK. And that DPhil was on Aristotle's Ethics, which he got in 2 years, which is like a world record, isn't it, Noah?
I'm sure it's not a world record.
And then after that, he went to Yale Law School. He clerked for an appellate judge named Harry Edwards, and then clerked for the Supreme Court, Justice David Souter. And then he was a baby law professor at NYU, where he was a hot commodity in the New York media scene. And then he made his way over to Iraq to advise on the Constitution of Iraq. And then he finally made his way over to Harvard when he was 36. Is that right? Roughly?
Yeah, give or take. Yep.
Yeah. Where
Julia, should I now go back to your childhood and
I just
you're
think
being raised on the shores of Lake Michigan? I feel this isn't equal otherwise.
No, this is important. People need to know how impressive you are. And he's been teaching constitutional law and First Amendment at Harvard, all the while publishing so many books. He's published 10 books. His last, To Be a Jew Today, was a New York Times bestseller. And the one that he's working on right now is on AI and the importance of being human. And I'm very excited for this book. Hopefully it will come out. He just turned in the proposal, so this is very exciting. And he's also one of the most integrity-filled human beings I have ever met in my life. That's why I married him. He's a man of ethics, and he's also open-minded, which he would have to be to marry me. So I just feel so blessed to be here with you, and I wanted people to know a little bit more about you.
That's incredibly nice. And everybody, from that presentation, you can see why the New York Times and Rolling Stone and other publications have described Julia as the person who was the original influencer, the OG influencer, and who, having done it, then gave it all up for a life of bohemia and creativity and now academia.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so when I first met Noah, one of the things that I'm going to start with my question. One of the things that I tracked with Noah was that he had like 8 jobs, and I could not fathom how he fit all of those jobs into one life. And also, Noah does not work weekends, and he does not work evenings, and he does not work Jewish holidays. And I could not understand. In addition to his teaching, in addition to writing the books, in addition to writing his Bloomberg column, which is a weekly column, which would be someone else's full-time job, in addition to consulting for companies like Meta, Anthropic, TikTok, eBay, he also mentors students and has time to do the Society of Fellows where he's been a chair, which is the preeminent postdoctoral program in the country. And I could not
I'm getting
understand how
exhausted just hearing you describe what I have to do every day.
I'm exhausted being married to you. So I couldn't understand, how do you do it? So, Noah, how do you fit it all in?
That is a great question. And the short answer is that I am very disciplined. And the way I try to be disciplined, you mentioned that I know there are times when I don't work, and that allows me to let my ideas develop and percolate and pop into my head. And I try to get up every morning, and after working out and briefly meditating, I try to sit down at my computer and I write until I've produced a quota of words that I set for myself. And it's a big quota, even though a lot of what I write ends up getting thrown out. I write 2,000 words more or less every single day. And I write that, and I'm able to write that because I know that I'm not going to end up publishing a great number of them. And I also dictate to the computer, which makes it a little faster since I'm the world's worst typist without exception. And my handwriting is illegible. So I pretty much have to dictate those words into the computer. So I do that. And then I have the whole afternoon to read, to think, to meet with people, to have conversations, and to try to come up with new ideas and to kind of produce a state of the world as I'm thinking about it at that given moment in time. And then, and this really does matter, I think it's one of the reasons I'm able to do this. When the day is over, I just stop. I come home. When the kids were little, I would make them dinner. Now that they're out of the house, you and I have dinner together. Julia and I have dinner together. We try to do that just about every day. And we also spend a lot of time together on the weekends and on holidays. And that really does give me the capacity to just keep on getting back to it. And so I think that honestly is the secret. When I'm working, I'm really working. And as you, Julia, know better than anybody else, I don't like to be bothered when I'm working. In fact, I have a terrible personality if I'm interrupted. It's very unworthy of being emulated. It's awful, but it's because I'm in a total mega focused zone. And when I'm lucky, I'm also in a flow state. So I work myself up into the flow state. And once I'm there, I really try not to get out of the flow state until the time comes. And then I try to pop myself out of it.
But how do you get into that flow state? Because from my perception, you go into what I call seventh gear. And it's so for everyone listening, the way I experience it watching from the outside is there are literal gears of Noah Feldman, and he will go, "Rrr, rrr, rrr." And then when he's in seventh gear, that's maximum focus. And yeah, you definitely don't want to interrupt him in that moment. But how do you get to that state, flow state, if you will?
It took a lot of practice to learn how to do this, but knowing that I'm going to produce words, ideas, stories, arguments, introspection, whatever it might be, means that I have to enter into some space where my brain is kind of going to function on autopilot, where I'm not, in the sense that I'm not going to be saying to myself at every moment, what's the next word you're going to say? Where's this argument going? It has to be happening almost at a subconscious level in order for me actually to produce. And if you think about it, that's what we're all doing when we're in flow state. When you're in flow state, you're not constantly thinking like, what's next? What's next? You're doing it. You're executing it. And so that took many, many years of practice. I mean, I've been following this discipline since I was a first year professor in 2001. And I've been doing it almost every working day ever since. And at first it was really hard. It was totally brutal. every day to do it. And sometimes there are times when I'm in a project and I'm really at a stuck point when it still feels incredibly brutal. But what I've learned to do is to know that I'm going to get there, and having the confidence that I'm going to get there allows me to relax into it. And by relaxing into it, I can slide into that productive state much more quickly than I ever did at the beginning. And there are some tricks that are good. So one really good example is almost everyone says, what do I do when I face a blank page? Because it's scary to face the blank page. And my trick there is instead of writing, I talk. And I pretend I'm talking to someone that I care about. When I started, it was my grandmother. I wrote everything from my grandmother. May she rest in peace. My grandmother was incredibly smart and had zero formal education, well, except for elementary school and high school, until she was retired. Because in her family, there was only enough money to send one kid to school. And so they sent her brother to school. He became a dentist. And she went to work and ran her own clothing store. One of the reasons I like clothes, ran her own clothing store for many, many years. And then when she retired, she actually went back and got her college degree. And then she got a master's degree. And then she actually had a short but meaningful career as a gerontologist of all things. So I would write everything for her. And that's also really helpful to have someone you're talking to, even if they're not there, helps you slide into it. So those are a few of the tricks that I try to use. I mean, it's honestly, it is kind of a process of self-hypnosis.
Yeah, I noticed that with you. And the next question, which comes from a reader named Cal Mann, is adjacent to this conversation. He asks,
Kalman,
what
one word or two people? CAL space MAN or KALMAN?
CAL space MANN.
Amazing. Very cool.
Yeah. Okay. So I assume he asks, what practices or habits do you cultivate to ensure that such confidence does not cloud your objectivity? So he's saying he imagines you have a healthy degree of confidence. That's what he's
I
saying.
wonder why he
And
thinks that.
and wait, there's more to the question. How do you keep your intellectual perspective broad and porous, open to insights that arise beyond the walls of academia? Good question.
Those are great questions. The key to it, I think, is knowing the difference between knowing something really well and not knowing it. And one of the tricks to knowing that you're ignorant is learning a lot about something. Because when you learn a lot about something, you suddenly realize that you didn't do that for almost everything else. And so when those topics come up, you should have a healthy and objective sense that you don't know what you're talking about, because on one topic, you do know what you're talking about. And since my education started by being very, focused on certain areas, so I was originally studying medieval Jewish and Islamic thought. And I started from zero, obviously, but I went really, really deep into those things and did them for my doctoral work. And I knew a lot about that. And so then when other topics came up, I knew I didn't know anything about it. And so that made me more open to listening to what other people had to say. So I think that's the first thing. You get what you might call epistemic humility by actually knowing something. The other thing is always listen to the people who you disagree with more than anybody else. So probably most of you will know or will guess that I'm not a big Fox News devotee in terms of what my substantive views are. But when a big news story happens, I always try to make it a practice of first turning on Fox to hear what Fox is going to say about it. I read lots of people's opinions that I fundamentally disagree with, and I try and do that all the time. And I think that's a really good tool for reminding yourself that there's a different perspective on basically everything. Also asking yourself, when have I changed my mind? And then you realize that you've been wrong a lot. And if you've been wrong a lot, as I have in my life, both professionally and personally, it's really, really helpful to remind yourself of that. And that will help you to stay open-minded and alive.
Well, and I would also add, Noah, especially since we got together, you've been introduced to entire new communities that you would otherwise probably never have even known existed. And I think that's broadened your horizons in a multitude of ways, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. That's not a leading question at all. No, I agree entirely. For those of you who don't know her, Julia is what I call a bohemian. That means she starts from different assumptions than someone who's driven by the rational part of the mind. Julia is brilliant
Well,
and very capable of rational analysis. But I think it's fair to say that your preference is to lead with your heart and be open-hearted, and that you're surrounded by a community of people who share that perspective. And so when I met you and then started meeting your friends, not too long thereafter, it actually took longer than it might have otherwise because we were in COVID. So it actually took some months before I started meeting your friends. Um, but I noticed that there was a different approach and a different perspective. And the trick that I use then is a trick that I love that I call the trick of playing anthropologist. If you're thrown into a situation where you don't know the rules of the road, just ask in a very nice way, hey, would you tell me about that? Or would you explain that to me? And it turns out almost everybody is really happy in life to explain why they're doing what they're doing. And as long as you're asking in an open minded way that shows you're curious and interested, people are going to talk and they're going to tell you a lot. And so then you can gradually pick up on what they're thinking. And then if you're a good anthropologist, you can kind of play along a little bit. You become a participant observer. At first, in your brain, you're thinking, oh my God, or I was thinking, oh my God, these people are really different than I am. They know how to have fun. I don't know how to have fun. They wear bright colors. I wear, 3 shades of brown and blue and maybe a little gray. They have parties where they listen to music and sit in.
Dance.
They dance, which I'm not very good at. They sit in squishy puddles of pillows and mattresses on the floor. They hug each other when they're only friends and not more than that. There's just many, many,
Yeah.
many features of life that I was completely unfamiliar with. And at first I was really uncomfortable, but I tried to do what anthropologists would do, which is to participate knowing I didn't belong. And if you do that for long enough, you can start getting used to it, especially if it's kind of great. So that's another trick that I strongly believe in.
Yeah. It's been amazing to watch you experience new communities and new ways of being. And I think you are already an open-minded person, but even open-minded people need to take themselves out of their environment from time to time and be in new environments to test that open-mindedness. And I think that's something that you did, and it's something that's so important. Okay, so we have another question from Jin Ah. Jin space AH. And this person writes, I would be honored to hear your thoughts on a few questions. On a personal path, in a society that often measures success by traditional milestones like marriage, how can one maintain the conviction that their, quote, delayed path is the right one? There are some other questions after that. So you want
That's
to
a
start?
great, yeah, that's a great, great question. And I grew up, I should say, in an environment, you warned everybody, Julia, that I like to talk about my childhood. I grew up in an environment, a modern Orthodox Jewish environment, where the expectation was that all of us would get married to a person of the opposite sex shortly after college. And many, many, many of my friends, the great majority of them, did that. And almost all of those people are in what appear to be extremely happy marriages and are still in those marriages. So I want to start by saying it worked for them. But I understood what it was to feel pressured to do things a certain way in that family kind of sense. And I think the short answer is that it goes to your conception of what a good life is going to be like. If you tell yourself that good life is checking the boxes, then the minute you haven't checked a box that your friends have checked, you're going to feel bad. And it's understandable that you would feel bad because you're thinking, wait a minute, that's the route to a good life, and I haven't done it. But if you think that a good life involves, among other things, finding your own path and being the author of your own life and not doing things just because everyone else expects you to do them, but because you want to do them, then it's fine to move at a different pace and you're going to have a more interesting journey. You just have to think of it as you're on a path, and the path isn't an interesting path, is not the shortest distance between 2 points. That's not a path, that's a line. And, it's no fun to go for a hike in a straight line. You want to go for a hike and life is like a hike. You want to go for a hike along a curvy, interesting path with views and experiences and the sublime and sometimes the scary. And so for that, you can't do it on a schedule. Um, the truth is, Julie, I would actually love to hear your answer on this question too, because I think you're even more successfully resistant to the pressures of social forces than I am. So how do you answer that, Julia?
I mean, I thought it was so funny that I saw this question in the inbox. We have an inbox of all the questions that our readers ask us. So please, if you want to ask a question, it's ask@professornoahfeldman.com, or you can ask in the chat box and I will get to those questions as well. But I thought it was funny because obviously, like, we got married, I was 44. And that was not necessarily my plan. And this is my first marriage. So I definitely waited much longer than I think my parents were comfortable with. but I didn't do it on purpose. I just hadn't found the person that I really truly felt was worthy of saying yes to a lifetime with. And I spent a lot of time wondering why my particular path was different from other people's paths. But I think where I eventually landed is I could not have had the experiences that I had prior. And Noah and I have done a little bit of maybe everyone does this when they get married, but we would compare, well, where were you when I was like a more reasonable age, right? Like age 30 or something. And I was actually not in a place where I could have been the kind of committed partner that Noah deserves. And I own that. I had to go through my own journey and a lot of therapy and a lot of growth. And I think Noah, same thing. I mean, you've been doing really beautiful personal growth work for 15 years now. And I think that's a part of it. And even though in my mind's eye growing up, I always imagined getting married in maybe a more like quote unquote reasonable, whatever that even means, right? Like the average time to get married, which is I think roughly around 30 now, but rising, right? And now I wonder to myself, I have so many girlfriends who are not married in their late 30s and early 40s. And I don't know if they are going to get married. I don't necessarily think anyone needs to get married. I'm very grateful to be married to you. But if you hadn't come along, I don't think I would have just gotten married to someone else. I just think I wouldn't
Wow,
be
that's nice.
married.
That's nice to hear. Actually, that's great. That makes me feel better. I thought I was
But I
kind of
didn't.
worried that I was just the guy. I was just the guy standing there holding the ring.
You were not worried about that. But I think it's really important to do, to really, especially now, to be like, you know what? Everyone does things differently and there isn't a right way to do it. Period. Full stop. Okay,
I saw another question on there, by the way, that I think I also would love to hear your views on. I mean,
please.
I have views on it too. Someone asked a question about it was just now on the live
Okay, tell me.
about hyper focus, which is something that I guess I have,
Yep.
and ADHD, and what do we think about the prevalence of ADHD that's out there in the world, and how that's interacting with the way we live now.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this a lot, and you have strong views about it. So maybe share your views on ADHD, and then I'll share mine.
You have stronger views on ADHD than I do. I think I have it. I think I've had it since I was a child. I have not been diagnosed, but obviously utilizing TikTok or any kind of short form video platform is going to reinforce any kind of attentional, uh, how should I put this? Like attentional issues that you might have.
Hmm.
But I had it way before TikTok. But again, I don't medicate myself, and I just am aware that this is a symptom that I'm experiencing, or this is an experience I'm having. Maybe is a better
Yeah,
way
I
to
mean,
put
I think to start with, there's definitely variability among people in how comfortable they are sliding into forms of focus. And I definitely had an early formational experience of reading. And I was that kid who, once I started reading, I really couldn't stop. And, my parents would prohibit me from bringing a book to the table because I would have brought a book to the dinner table if they had let me. And at bedtime, they would say lights out, and I would get a flashlight and I would read under the covers, which is one possible explanation for my uh, somewhat mediocre vision and the glasses and contact lenses I've had to wear. So I couldn't stop. And even in my 20s, when I used to backpack with my friend Seth, my super close, still very close friend Seth, over the summers, he would say about me sometimes that I would get irritable, and he would say, "You need your fix of book." So we would stop whatever we were doing. We'd like walk out of a museum or whatever it was, and he'd be like, "Just sit down and read something until you're a human again." And it actually worked incredibly well. And I think he was right. I have and had a kind of almost addiction to that focus behavior. Now,
But can I
that
just say
suggests,
something,
yeah,
Noah? Can I
please,
just say
yeah.
something? You, my understanding, and admittedly, this is, just from reading, okay? I'm not a doctor, obviously. But my understanding is that ADHD also has hyperfocus as a part of the experience. So what you're describing wouldn't if someone were hyper-focused on a book, that actually wouldn't necessarily mean that they didn't have ADHD. In fact, my understanding is that they actually have challenges in shifting tasks. So they get hyper-focused and then they like just go and go and go, and then they can't shift as easily. So, but anyway, I'm not an expert
Yeah,
in
I mean,
ADHD. So.
what I was going to say about that is you're absolutely right that the current DSM definition of ADHD does include hyperfocus as one of the possible symptoms along a wider range of symptoms. It's not the only one, but it's one of the symptoms that could be counted in the diagnosis. That's how the DSM works. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, it usually gives a list of symptoms, and if you have a certain number of those symptoms, you qualify as having the diagnosis. So yes, and Jim is pointing out here that uh, that hyperfocus and time blindness can be components. I'm lucky that I don't mostly have time blindness,
No,
but I
you
do
do
have.
not.
But I
You
do
do
have.
not.
I do have a phenomenon of hyperfocus, and I think what I would say is, it's really interesting to watch the development of the diagnosis of any disease. They come up with a new DSM every few years, and you could just watch. It's completely fascinating to watch definitions change, symptoms change, and they're all in a complex interaction as well with the diagnostics are in a complex interaction with the treatment questions, since the point of the DSM is to enable treatments. And then the different treatments, many of which are medical treatments, in pharmaceutical treatments, are often measured by, well, does it help? And if it helps you, then maybe you had the symptoms of the disease. And that's a perfectly reasonable way. It's a very pragmatic way of developing a diagnosis. Um, so, we know that there's been a rapid rise of ADHD diagnoses. Some of that has got to be what Julia was describing. It's got to be the effects of technology.
Oh,
I
definitely.
mean, over the last few days, I was mentioning this to you earlier today, Julia. My algorithms have been serving me a steady diet of um, influencers who are advising people on how it is that they should get people's attention online. And I'm fascinated by this because I've made a handful of explanation kind of videos with in conjunction with Bloomberg Opinion, which is where I write my weekly column. And sometimes nobody watches them, and sometimes a couple of million people watch them. And so it's fascinating to try to figure out, what the causes are. But one of the things that's a very consistent theme in this content is you have to catch people immediately in the first 2 to 3 seconds. And that seems to be consistent advice. And that's presumably because most of us look at something, and if we don't like it, we just scroll through in that period of time. And that form of human action and interaction probably hasn't ever existed before in that exact way. I mean, maybe if you're walking, and hunting in the,
No.
somewhere, no what?
No, there's no, it hasn't existed. It just
Yeah,
hasn't
I mean,
existed.
we've had to be attuned to different stimuli, and so we're clearly capable of a rapid attunement. But this is an unusual and a new kind of thing. So that has to be having some effect on people's capacity to concentrate. And I find it too. I find it harder to sit down and just start writing. And just start reading than it used to be for me. I can still do it, but it's sometimes harder than it used to be. So I think there's some cultural component that's in play as well. So I guess I think that as I often think about diagnoses, there's a cultural component, there's a biological component, there's a life experiential component, and there's the subtlety of it. And it's all against the backdrop of the function or purpose of the diagnosis itself. And to the extent that that diagnosis is for treatment, that's also going to come into play.
Okay, so, and by the way, anyone who wants to hear more about that, we have a interesting conversation with Princeton professor Graham Burnett, who is the author of a recent book called Intensity, which is focused on some of the issues that we are all running into right now around big tech taking our attention, grabbing it, and not letting it go until we give them all our money. Okay, next question. This is from